Hi, welcome to Tactical to Practical, the real world business show. I'm Joe Carlisle.
And I'm Ken Rose.
Come join us as we peel back the onion of small business success and explore strategies, tactics, and solutions for real life business people with real life business challenges. Hey, everybody. Welcome. I'm Joe Carlisle.
And I'm Ken Rose.
And this is Tactical to Practical, the real world business show. This is the show where real life business people get to learn how to overcome real life challenges. And to that effort, we are still asking people to email us your business questions at info@tacticaltopractical.net or send us your business story. We'd love to feature your business here on the show. At no charge for now.
Yeah, for now it's free. And again, your business story can be either how you got started, what inspired you to get into the business that you're in, or maybe just a little blurb about your business, where it is, where it's located, and what you offer.
Yeah. How the reason you're successful. Do you feel that you've applied a certain set of skills or community? Mm-hmm. Is there something that has made you rocket to success? Or something that's allowed you to slog out the last 25 years and be a real asset to the community. So.
And if you're not that successful, you need to watch the show.
That's right. That's right. And even you know, I was having this conversation with somebody just the other day. They asked me how I end up finding so many stories. Where do I find people? And I keep saying to them, the secret. There's a secret. The secret is everybody has a cool story.
Yes.
They just don't recognize it as a cool story because it's their story. There are parts of it they don't like. There are parts of it they think nobody could use. They think that they can. I've got to tell you, with my journey out of addiction and out of my past with run-ins with the law. Again, somebody asked me the other day how much time I've done, and I told them, and their eyes got real big. They're like, You, Joe? Yes, I am 60 years old. I was not always the sterling character that you see. But that's the cool part. Is
right.
They have a story too, right? Their story can be, in this particular case, they were a veteran.
Right.
And how they switched from being a veteran into the private world, the private sector, into what they're doing. So
sure.
So don't be ashamed of your story. Send it to us, okay? Today we are actually going to leapfrog out of well, not actually leapfrog, jump out of the subject we talked about last week, which was now you have an idea. Now what? You've done your research. You've decided you're going to do a business. So today we're going to talk about corporate structure.
Now, before we get started, although Joe and I look like attorneys and accountants, we are not attorneys or accountants. So the information that we're giving you is more for your own benefit. But if you have any more detailed questions, contact your attorney or your accountant for correct and proper procedures for your business. Every business is different.
Thank you for remembering that, Ken.
Yeah.
The truth is this is about education and entertainment.
Right.
First education, then entertainment. What do they call that? Edutainment.
There we go. We just created a new word.
A new word.
We're trademarking that later.
That's today. Right. And actually, don't laugh, but whenever I'm sitting with people taking a listing or filling out contracts, I make them look me in the eyes and I say, repeat after me. Big old smile on my face. And we can talk about the value of a smile in another show. Big old smile on my face and I say, repeat after me. I am not a lawyer. Joe, you are not a lawyer. Joe, you are not an accountant. So thank you for remembering that. But we hope that what we talk about today may give you questions to ask your attorney or your accountant. Sometimes when you're getting into business, you've got this, I love this phrase. It's like taking a drink of water out of a fire hose. Right? You go to a legal seminar, they're telling you how to set up a business. You're like,
we're going to streamline it for you.
That's right.
We're only going to touch on each business structure in a small piece. We're not going to get into all the details of it.
Because we're not attorneys or accountants. We just want to give you a general overall. And the great place to start with that is, it's so hard to understand that you really need, we didn't talk about this much last week, is what is your goal? that could have been a section of last week's show,
Mhm.
but we were kind of running on, so we cut the string when we needed to. But if before you set a business structure for your business, and last week we talked about the difference between full-time side hustle or a hobby. Right. And so you need to understand what you're trying to accomplish. Are you, and what does your industry say your structure is probably most beneficial to, right? So when I came into real estate, my goal was to work 20 hours and make six figures. I quickly learned that's not reality. It was fantasy, and there are ways to set goals. And we're going to do a whole show on goals and how you
Planning
set them and planning. And as a matter of fact, next week's show is going to be about business planning.
Correct.
And so I encourage you to make sure you tune into that one. But the goal, for instance, what is your goal for this business?
Well, in my business, the goal is to keep it small. I'm not looking to be a C corp and sell shares and investors and things like that. So my business structure, I'm structured as, believe it or not, a S corp, but all of our accounting is as an LLC. So and we'll discuss why it's an LLC and how that works. But even an S corp, you can issue shares, and we'll talk about that as well. But probably, Joe, the easiest business structure is the sole proprietorship.
Right, and that's almost the default business structure, right? If you pick up a name, you register a name with SunBiz, which is part of the process, and you start selling services, you are by default a sole proprietor. You don't have to do anything for the government to assume that you are a sole proprietor. And I just didn't want to say on a side note, the basic reason for a business structure is to give you the best benefit of taxes and legal protection.
Correct.
Okay, so it's something that, and we're talking about businesses here now. Okay, so don't let your eyes glaze over. These are things that business people have to take a look at. And I see this a lot in realtors is, they don't understand it's a business.
Yes.
I actually advise this to people who want to add a rental to their portfolio. I have to explain to them, well, you're buying a business. You're not buying a house and you're going to rent it out. Realistically, you need to think about it like you just bought a business. You bought an asset that's going to generate income.
Correct.
Which is the basic definition of a business.
Right.
An asset that generates an income. So your default is sole proprietor. What do you got to do? How does that work?
Well, basically, as a sole proprietor, you can have your business called Joe's Golf Clubs, but when you do business or DBA, it would be Joe Carlisle DBA Joe's Golf Clubs. So as a sole proprietor, you don't get a lot of the benefits from a tax perspective or a liability perspective that you would as one of the other types of corporations. And so that's the tricky part, because now as a sole proprietor, some of the deductions you would take as a corporation type, you can't take. And so every dollar that you make as a sole proprietor is your income. So for example, if Joe's Golf Clubs makes $100,000 in 2022, that's your income for 2022. But if Joe's Golf Clubs was a corporation that had $100,000 in sales, but spent $5,000 in advertising, he had cost of goods that he purchased, he had utilities, he had rent, he had all these other things, then you're able to deduct those expenses easier with a corporation than a sole proprietorship. So
typically, if you are a sole proprietor, you're going to be working, the money that you are generating is going to come to you either directly from the customer or from another company that you have contracted with as a 1099. You will have to report everything as income. You will be able to deduct certain kinds of business expenses. If you are a sole proprietor, there's a whole level of the tax code designed for that, so they can offset each other. And we talked about goals. So if your goal is to make a little bit of extra money or to offset some of the tax burden that you have, and a lot of people have sole proprietorships, and LLCs, which we'll talk about in a minute, tend to fall into this range. if they have a side hustle, a lot of people don't have a side hustle to make money. We're talking about goals again, because they may have a high-end income on the other side.
Correct.
And so maybe they or their spouse runs a side hustle to get the tax advantages of deductions to offset some of that primary income, so that they can get a better savings and not pay as much as income tax. The other thing about a sole proprietorship is it's probably a good structure if you don't have a risk of anybody being injured. Okay, if you're selling something on Etsy, if you're selling signs at a a craft fair twice a year, you're doing maybe you're on the weekends you're painting numbers on the curb of the house, doing something like that. There's not really much of a chance that there's going to be any real liability. You're not going to hurt anybody. As a realtor, okay, I need to think, because I'm in houses with people. And if somebody gets hurt in a house I'm showing, I could get sued.
Right.
So I need a business structure that might help me not have to give up my car, my house, my computer, and my wife's jewelry, and all that other stuff. So.
Well, there's a lot that goes along with that. Actually working with a young lady right now that's starting a small business, and part of the items that she's looking to sell as a sole proprietor are branded, so to speak. So she's creating something that has the name of a business on it, and I've explained the liability of that and what you can run into. It's one thing to get a cease and desist for using something you're not supposed to use, but it's another thing when that company decides to turn around and sue you
to make an example
to make an example. So we'll talk about some of those things. Whereas a sole proprietor, you also have to be cautious of what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Right.
Because every business is different. Because if you're painting the sidewalk, you're painting house numbers, and then the HOA says, well, that was illegal, and you say, well, I'm not cleaning it up. Then all of a sudden, as a sole proprietor, now you have a lawsuit. So
again, it's your goal and the type of business should dictate to a large degree if you're going to be a sole proprietor or an LLC.
Right.
Let's talk about LLC. What's the difference between sole proprietor and LLC?
Well, LLC, you're a limited liability corporation, which means that, well, first of all, you have what's called a corporate veil to protect you with your business insurance, things like that, for any liabilities. Not that you wouldn't personally be responsible if it was something severe, but you limit that. The other advantage with an LLC is that you're able to deduct your expenses that you wouldn't normally be able to deduct as a sole proprietor. With an LLC, usually, the way my LLC works is we do our regular corporate taxes. We put all of our expenses in, which could be anything from products that we've purchased, cost of goods, cost of labor, overhead, advertising, all those things. And then the corporation itself doesn't get taxed. What happens is whatever the net gain is for that year then comes down to me in my personal taxes I claim as income. But within that, there's a lot of things as an LLC I'm able to do that as a sole proprietor you may not be able to do. For example, like my IRA, I'm able to put pre-tax dollars in it throughout the year. Oh, and I'm able to add throughout the year to do that to reduce my tax expense. Other things like my vehicle payment, I can put that through my LLC because I need a vehicle to deliver printing, to provide services to my clients, to go see my clients. So that becomes a tax deduction. And here's the difference. We'll just talk about a vehicle because that's easy for people to understand. You know what? We'll talk about it as soon as we come back from the break, and we'll see you right around the bend here. So we'll be right back. Catch us in just a minute or two. Welcome back, everybody, to Tactical to Practical, the real world business show. I'm Ken Rose, and I'm here with Joe Carlisle.
I'm Joe Carlisle.
But before we went on the break, we talked a little bit about an LLC, and I mentioned about a vehicle.
I was going to say, I wanted you to continue that because it's actually a perfect example of the difference between the two.
Right. So here you go. So let's say your vehicle payment is $500 per month. When you use it as a business expense, you're able to deduct it as part of your business expense, whether it's mileage, whether it's wear and tear, usage, all of those things. As a sole proprietor, you actually have to take that money as income. You're adding it to your weekly income. That $500 car payment is now part of your income, which you cannot deduct. And again, we're not accountants, so I'm just giving you a scenario that I run through from time to time. And that's one of the differences. Health insurance, for example, is paid through the business. So before it comes into my paycheck and I'm taxed on it, and it's part of my income, it's a business expense. So the business gets the benefit.
The purpose of any corporate structure at its very base, again, we talked about taxes and liability. So, running the car payment or the expenses of the car, which you can actually run both under a corporate contract, as well as some mileage. If you're a sole proprietor, it works just like your personal taxes. So you can either only take wear and tear or mileage. You can't actually take the payment as part of the, you might be able to take the interest, but you can't take the payment as it. Healthcare is another perfect example. If you are a sole proprietor, healthcare is not a tax deduction unless unless it comes out to like $10,000 or 10% of your personal income. You can deduct healthcare if it's 10% of your personal income or more.
But again, that's an accounting issue.
That's an accounting issue. So,
CPA.
But if you run it through your LLC, the cost of your healthcare becomes deductible as a business expense. So you're not actually paying taxes on it as a person. So
the LLC just gives you more protections as a business owner, more tax benefits as a business owner. And it's just one type of business structure. And the LLC is the easiest corporate structure to really manage.
Now, the other benefit to the LLC is any assets not owned by the LLC can, the way I understand it, again, this is a legal accounting question, any assets not owned by the LLC cannot be attached in a lawsuit. So if somebody is out looking at homes with me, or somebody's at a home that I've listed, I can't be named in a lawsuit, or I can be named in a lawsuit. Joe Carlisle LLC can be named in a lawsuit, but Joe and Patty's car can't be seized as part of that lawsuit. And it's not all about not getting the lawsuit, because if you're in business, you need a lawyer. Okay, you need a good lawyer. Call us if you need to find one. We both know the best lawyers, literally the best lawyers in South Lake and West Orange County. Yes, I'll go that far. I am that
there you go.
Grandiose to say I know the best lawyers. Is that it protects you if you lose that lawsuit.
Right.
Okay, so the whole point is to protect your assets, your personal assets, which is the tax thing is all about protecting personal assets. Right. So, all right. What about the next one?
Well, you have your next is your S corporation, and your S corporation is just a step up from an LLC, where you have one type of stock that's usually common shares. They can be 100, and then those common shares are usually owned by the member of the S corporation. You have some different benefits. I don't know all the details of an S, other than that we're registered as an S and then we file as LLC. I don't know how we do that, but that's my accountant's thing. But it's just where you can issue shares, which is different than just an LLC. And then, of course, you have your C Corp. Well, an S Corp also is a corporation that you intend to keep as a private corporation.
Right.
So you can grow it as big as you want, but it's still going to be privately owned.
Yeah, it'll never be on the stock exchange.
Correct. And then your C Corp that's where you're going to look to grow. You're going to look for investors. You're going to have different types of shares of stock, different buy-ins, different types of equity available to shareholders, and you wind up answering to a board instead of yourself or your spouse or your partners. And that's really that's the big wigs, and that's where you want to take your business multinational, grow it.
And a lot of these, I'm glad you just said bigwigs, because again, deferring to the lawyers and the accountants, a lot of times they will advise you to have one structure or another, because a C Corp is very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
It's expensive to start. It's expensive to maintain. You've got to have boards of directors. You've got to have meetings. You've got to have report the minutes of the meetings. You've got to give financials like on a quarterly basis to all the shareholders.
Correct.
There's a very compliance oriented nature to it. So, is your idea to help people wax their surfboards locally? You just want to get to know all the best surfing spots and all the kids. You want to help them wax, to give advice on how to wax a surfboard. You're probably not, a C corp. All right.
Right.
I mean, maybe if you're really popular, you might be an S corp. Of course, you're doing less board waxing and more surfing at that point because you're very, very successful. Right. If you are an LLC, you're probably a realtor. Usually people who provide individual services under an umbrella become LLCs. People who operate full-time businesses out of their garage or a shop on their land, they can be LLCs. Very much your independent painters, tradesmen will be LLCs to protect, again, their person, and so that they can get a lot of those business expenses filtered through. Now, there is abuse. Some people take the lower end corporate structures and run what is obviously expenses that have nothing to do with business through their business accounts. I would not encourage this. The IRS gets very nasty.
For example, your child's private school education cannot fall under corporate training.
That's right.
But again, don't do stupid things.
That's right. Actually, that's one of the reasons. I mean, a lot of people who are business people may understand that several years ago the rules changed about entertaining.
Yes.
It used to be that if I had a client with me, we didn't even have to talk about business. I could take them out to the local gentleman's club and spend $8,000 on entertaining. It's a strip joint, Ken. I tried to clean it up for you, all right? And the government caught on to that,
right.
And of course, I think their change was a little draconian, because now I can only deduct, a
percentage, I believe.
A percentage. I think it's 50%, or, and it usually has to be, there's a rule, it's something along the lines of, again, would have to have a clarification from an accountant or a lawyer, but something about you can only deduct your meal for travel if it's something that you would not normally be able to afford, or it's something like you would not normally spend.
Well, or it could be in proximity to your home or business.
Right.
If you're, and I don't know what that number is. It could be if you are, beyond 50 miles of your home or 100 miles of your home, then you may be able to deduct that. I don't know. Could be.
Right. So, and typically, we talked about the auto deduction. Right. Typically, you're deducting wear and tear using the car as a business car. They usually want you to track mileage.
Right.
And you're not allowed to count commuting time.
Yeah. Right? So what Joe did before the show today, and we're here in South Lake County, Joe drove to Boca Raton and then swung back through McDonald's to get his breakfast so that he could deduct the full expense of that to get on the show.
Do you know, though, I mean, as nutty as this sounds, to follow the rules every day, I don't go show customers from my house.
Go to the office first?
I drive to the office, okay, and I go into the office, and I mean, I just make sure I'm there. I put in, that's where I start my day. And then even if somebody wants to meet me at 7 o'clock in the morning for breakfast, I'm blessed in that my office is only 5 minutes from my house, but I drive to my office and then leave. Now, it doesn't work the same way if your office is in your home.
Well, you can leave and come back, I guess. I don't know.
You have to, that time from your home to that first appointment counts as the commuting time.
Right.
You're not technically supposed to take that time. So there are rules to understand and to get in. And again, a lot of it's about taxes, but a lot of it gets down to your goals. If you have a business and you're starting a business, you're going to, and we're going to talk about business planning next week, But you need to have a corporate structure, especially if you've got the kind of business you're setting up a manufacturing plant. Even if you're setting up a small manufacturing outfit that's only going to have 10 employees, you're probably going to have to borrow some money. Part of your business plan is going to have to outline what type of corporate structure are you going to have. And so you need to know what your goal is. Are you going to become, the premier printer for the state of Florida?
Yes, please.
You're probably going to want to be a C Corp, though. I mean, because that is going to allow you access to different kinds of borrowing, grants, loans. Borrowing is loans. But
Borrowing is loans.
Borrowing is loans.
But what we're going to do, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about borrowing and loans, because that relates to both real estate and business.
Yep.
Whether you are looking to buy property or borrow from a bank. So we'll be right back after this, and we'll get you started on our last segment.
All right. And welcome back. I'm Joe Carlisle.
And I'm Ken Rose. How are you?
And this is Tactical to Practical, the Real World Business Show. All right. Before the break, we were talking about part of your goal, where you're going to go with your business, and why do you want it. Look, I think that we tend to miss, because Ken and I were just talking on the break, that we don't want to give the wrong impression. Okay, because a lot of people hide money, use a corporate structure to hide their money from the government. And that's not at all, Mr. IRS, if you're listening, that's not at all what we're talking about. The purpose of being in business is to generate money. As a matter of fact, the definition of a business in the United States of America and in the state of Florida is the attempt to make a profit. Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit about what we were just talking about.
Well, we were talking about borrowing money, loans, things like that. And I can give you 4 examples of why it's important to not only have your P&L right, but to report income.
For those of you who don't know, P&L is profit and loss statement.
So everybody knows that the pandemic hit, and the government issued paycheck protection programs that were available to companies that could prove that they had payroll expenses and what those payroll expenses were. So with my company, all of our payroll is done through ADP. And it's not like we have a lot of employees, but with ADP, when the PPP program started, ADP had a button that I pressed, and I was able to download all of my payroll information for that period of time and submitted it to the federal government, and we received Paycheck Protection Plan money. The second time that came around, again, we had the information, provided it to them. We received the money, and then, of course, because we were able to prove that it was used correctly, we were given that money. The last thing was an SBA loan. And it's always been so hard to get an SBA loan as a new business owner, as an existing business owner, because everything comes down to what do you make, what do you need the money for, how are you using it, and everything else. And because I have an accountant and I've always showed our income, I was able to get an SBA loan, which kept us moving and gave us opportunity to do some other things. Another reason why you want to show income in business, very simply, is I had a longtime vendor go out of business this year. And nobody else provides the service that we were getting from them. So I was able to go to my bank and borrow money to buy the equipment that I needed to do what I had somebody else doing. Which, again, showing money. And tapping into Joe's business, Joe knows in real estate, so many sole proprietors, as well as LLCs. You don't see this much in S Corps and C Corps,
right.
But LLCs and sole proprietors always try to show as little income as possible. Then you go to Joe and you want to go buy a house. What happens, Joe?
You don't buy a house.
Why?
Okay, so here's what happens. Is typically the people that are sole proprietors or LLCs, they're trying to protect, they're trying to limit their tax liability. Okay, they get deductions, they get a lot of deductions, and sometimes those deductions can be a little on the edge, in the gray area of yes or no, as opposed to your child's private school tuition. Correct. Or health care, which one is allowable. And so what ends up happening is they get good at taking deductions. And actually, one of the benefits of being an LLC is you get a lot of deductions. I mean, you can deduct, and when I look for an accountant, I always want somebody who's creative enough to educate me on everything I'm allowed to take.
This is acceptable. This is a gray area. You want to think about that.
You probably don't want to get down that road because it comes with a $10,000 fine and up to 7 years in prison. I want to avoid that at all costs.
Yes.
Hopefully, we all do. But what ends up happening is you'll get somebody who has an independent business, and maybe they're and I keep using painter because it's very typical. Lawn guy, lawn service, they deduct so much of their income that it looks like they make no money. But many times, a deduction you're allowed to take is actually far greater in value, which is what you're allowed to take for the deduction, than you actually laid out in expense. Mm-hmm. And so they end up zeroing or close to zeroing their income. If you go to buy, now you have this very successful business, and your wife wants to move from the 1952 2-bedroom, 1-bath bungalow you've been renting for the last 10 years because rent is getting expensive. Now you want to move into a house, but you don't show any income, even though you generated $300,000 last year.
Right.
Even though your actual take home that pays your expenses is $100,000 of that money, and you have no debt. If you only have 10 grand showing as income, the lender's not going to give you any money, because you just don't make enough to make a house payment, And
that's spot on, Joe. I mean, when I looked to do some refinance to put a pool in, I had to show income, got the refinance. Mm-hmm. Then I don't know, it was my accountant or a buddy of mine said, hey, HELOC loans are extremely low right now. Get a HELOC, and I got a HELOC loan, which I have. It's sitting in the bank. It's just sitting there. We've never used it.
Right.
But in an emergency, it's there. It doesn't cost me anything. But because I've always showed income to support being able to do that, it's a very easy process.
That's actually one of the things some of the best business people in the world do, is they make sure they're showing a certain income. When my wife and I got ready to buy a house, I started paying, I didn't take every deduction I was allowed. And the reason is I wanted to show a certain minimum income so that when I went to get a mortgage, I could get one. Mm-hmm. And that works not just with that. It's with a car, with
anything.
You're not going to be able to, and I'm not talking about living on borrowed money. I'm talking about having access to money, because the concept of business, the best concept of business is there's something called other people's money.
OPM.
Business in America is built on this concept. It's part of the purpose of becoming wealthy, so that you can leverage other people's time, money, and ideas by giving them your abundance, giving them access to your abundance, and then they're growing your money while they're growing their money. This is the way the system is supposed to work. If you've ever watched the show Shark Tank, that's the basic premise. These people have made hundreds of millions of dollars because they slogged it out in the trenches, built businesses, sold those businesses out, and now they take those profits and they reinvest into other businesses with the idea that in 5 years or 7 years, they're either going to get a certain income or they're going to have an exit plan, which is going to buy them out at 10, 20 times the money they put in. As the young business person, as the real life business person with a real life challenge, the reason most businesses in America fail, 90%, I think it's 90% of businesses in America fail within the first 3 years. And the reason, the most stated reason, is lack of capital. And that's all about money. And businesses go belly up when something like, the pandemic happens, and they can't borrow the money to keep them in business. I mean, you needed this service. If you couldn't borrow the money,
we would have been jammed up.
You'd have been jammed up. And now you not only have something to continue your business, but it's possible that at some point, when we're maybe a year out of all of this craziness, that you might be able to add that as a service to other people if you
Correct.
want to.
Right.
It's an opportunity. So that's the whole point of being able to gain access to borrowing.
Sure, because like the equipment that I bought, I could have paid cash, but because the interest rate was so low, because again, we'll get into credit and credit scores later, the interest rate was so low, it made more sense for me to take a low interest loan than to pull cash, working capital, to buy something. So again, it's show the income.
Now, now the opposite of that is when you're starting a business, you're going to need some good credit.
Yes.
Okay, so if you're a sole proprietor or you're an LLC for 5 years and you want to make that next step, but you've been zeroing out your income for the last 25 or the last 5, then the bank, you're going to have to present a business plan to the SBA, the Small Business Administration, to a lender, to a bank, to whoever's going to give you the money to like open up a shop and get a lease or build a building. They're going to want to see that your business has made some sort of a profit. Okay, and that may be represented the way Ken does it, where it comes down to him in personal income. They can work with that because they can see where it went, but they see that he made something.
Right.
And that's going to be very, very important, because if you zeroed out your income for all of those years and you go to the bank and say, hey, I want to borrow $500,000 because I need a truck and a bay and a workshop now because my HOA got strict and I can't do it in my garage anymore, you're going to be up the creek.
And to tag on to Joe, to buying trucks and stuff, with the SBA loans that have recently been given out, they're called economic injury disaster loans. So what that means is you get your $100K from the SBA, better not be taking a trip.
Oh, yeah.
Better not be buying new motorcycles and cars. And my accountant specifically said to me, every invoice that you pay, if it's for a paper vendor, or put the invoice number and the initials EIDL, so that my accountant knows that the money I got from the SBA, the disaster loan money, was used to pay actual real business expenses.
Real business expenses.
So, keep that in mind too. And again, we're not experts, but, definitely something.
Do you know what? There is one more business structure we want to talk about briefly. We're probably going to go over this.
Yeah, we'll just let this run and we'll rock and roll.
But here's the thing. When I got I didn't get a PPP loan, okay, because I'm a sole proprietor and LLC.
He's the only employee.
I'm the only employee, right? Although I knew people that got one. I thought it was a mistake. Turns out they all got forgiven, so maybe I should have. What I ended up, though, with was a grant.
Okay.
So there was a grant, part of the bailout plan, the original bailout plan, put money to counties. That Lake County was amazing in their distribution
Yes.
of it. They helped small business people. And this, I went through
we got
this
a grant
entire
for that,
project. I got a grant, and the grant helped me. But here's the beauty of it. The grant, my struggle was not as much my personal living expenses, my rent and stuff. It was my business expenses, because because of my health issues, when everybody else went into shutdown for 4 to 6 weeks, I went into not isolation. What did they call
Lockdown?
it? Quarantine. I went into quarantine for 16 weeks. And so my wife's a teacher, so thank God that we had income coming in. But I didn't have the income coming in to pay for my business expenses. And my business expenses continued even though I wasn't out showing houses. So when I got that grant money, I was able to show, and the grant money works the same way. If they give you a grant for something, it's not for you to go on a trip.
Right.
It's not for you to go buy a diamond ring or, fancy tires for your car. Although that could have been a business expense.
Right.
But I had to be able to show, one, to get the grant, I had to show I had legitimate expenses.
Correct.
That I needed to pay and had lost income for. And that I had to prove later on that, yes, if they come back and say, what did you do with this money? I have to have expenses, totally met.
Yeah, you have to show.
And this goes to part of what we're talking about in the loans. If I had not tracked the business expenses under my LLC, And my income under my LLC, I could not have said to the organization offering these grants that this is the business, this is the average income I've had for the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. These are my expenses, and now this is my income this year, and see, I can prove that I've had a loss.
Right.
Because again, I'm an individual guy. It's not like I have an employer that said, "Oh, I'm not giving you a check anymore." Those were easy to prove, mm-hmm. right? The other thing that I think is very interesting about this is, since I've mentioned grants, there's another business structure called not-for-profit.
Well, non-profit.
Non-profit.
Now, to clarify, just because it's called a non-profit does not mean that it does not make a profit.
Right.
So, and very simply, if you have $100,000 worth of expenses and you bring in $1 million worth of business as a nonprofit, you have to show that what that $900,000 is going to be used for, right. Or it's used in the future, but you're still making money because you're still paying people.
Right.
So nonprofit never means no profit.
Right. And I will say, just a side note, public service announcement: be careful who you're giving your money to.
Yes.
Because a lot of people come in under that umbrella of nonprofit, and it's only a device to provide certain people with an income.
Right.
Okay. And so I mean, I won't go down a political road, but there's a lot of scams in the nonprofit business. But nonprofit does have a purpose, mm-hmm. and it allows wonderful organizations like the Red Cross and Toys for Tots and the Women's Giving Alliance. There's South Lake Foundation, Find, Feed, and Restore.
Right.
They get, so Find, Feed, and Restore, perfect example. Okay, Find, Feed, and Restore last year got grants to expand their facility upwards of $1 million. Sounds like a lot of money, right?
Are you referring to the neighborhood center?
Neighborhood center. The neighborhood center of South Lake.
Let's make sure we're not giving money away.
Yes, sorry.
Coming out of Joe's checking account.
Fine. These two organizations I really, really love, so it's why they're on my mind all the time. South Lake Neighborhood Center. It's South Lake.
The neighborhood center of
South Lake.
Yes.
They just changed their name, so I'm still struggling a little. So they got grants, huge grants from some local organizations to expand their facilities, mm-hmm. to build a warehouse with freezers. And I mean, this is a major undertaking. But they still need money because they're still feeding people at the same time. That money had a specific purpose.
It has to be used for that purpose.
It has to be used for the purpose they asked for it. So that's why I say be careful. But now, if you have a great idea, if you're going to serve the community, if there's an organization, you want to create an organization to help serve the community or some underserved people in the community, you have a passion for homeless vets or anybody who's on the scale of, not Asperger's, what is the I can't.
But if you're interested in
forming a nonprofit to help, and a perfect example is our friend Otis Taylor. Okay. Give It A Foundation. All right. This is a nonprofit. Okay. And Otis specializes in coordinating people to provide volunteers for other organizations that struggle with getting a volunteer, because a lot of organizations, they have their regular volunteers, mm-hmm. And then they have events, and now they need 3 times as many volunteers. Sure. So that's what Otis does. He does several other things. He's an amazing guy. But that's the purpose of that. Okay, so there is a structure for it. If you have a passion for something, if there's a need in the community that you absolutely feel is not being served by business or government, we encourage you.
Nonprofit's the way to go.
Nonprofit's the way to go. And that helps keep you safe. Again, it protects you from taxes and liabilities. Because if you go out and raise that money, even if you're spending it where you're supposed to be, the government's going to want a chunk of it. Unless you're under the proper corporate structure. So I think that's enough about corporate structure.
Yeah, and really to close out today's show, Joe, it was about 11 years ago, and I decided, and this is if you're a sole proprietor, if you're an LLC, if you're an S corp. 11 years ago, I decided to put myself on payroll, legitimate payroll. And I paid myself a fair wage for the job that I'm doing. And again, if you are the GM of a company, don't pay yourself $200 a week. Pay yourself what a GM in your line of work at your volume would do. And I was petrified. I'm putting myself on payroll. And 11 years later, I have never missed a payroll. And so,
explain why you were petrified, though. I think a lot of people may not understand. Why would you be petrified to put yourself, and I understand, to put yourself on payroll?
Well, the first thing was, can I do this on a consistent basis? Can I do this consistently? And so that was part of the scary part. And the other part was, am I taking too much money? And Roy Titus, who started Minuteman Press International, would come in and he would talk to prospective, new franchisees. And he told everyone the same thing. Always pay yourself first. And the advantage, though, to paying myself a fair salary was that when business was great, I didn't take more money. I left it in the business. When business was slow, the money that I left in the business was able to pay that salary. So the consistency of it definitely helps.
This is the mistake so many people make, is because there is a mentality across all businesses.
Every business.
That says the business gets paid first. And yes, when you're starting out, look, if you're opening up a coffee shop and you're in your first 6 months,
right?
You may have to, there are businesses and industries where you may have to forego a paycheck to get yourself established.
Which is fine.
But too many people maintain that well into 3 and 5 years, which isn't fair to you. It's not fair to your family. It's not really fair to your employees.
Right.
Because you can't stay open long doing that.
Or your business. You'll never be able to borrow money.
You'll never be. So something's going to happen. You're going to end up, you're going to get burnt out. You're going to be divorced. Your wife is going to hate you. Your kids will hate you, because you need to generate an income. Remember, the definition of business is an attempt to make a profit. Okay, so we would encourage you to, yes, be aware of what the time frame for the business gets paid first, as opposed to, I'm going to take the good money when the money is good, and I'm not going to take no money when the money is bad.
Be consistent.
Be consistent, and that's a good thing to layer out to. I got to tell you, we're gonna switch gears here. We're getting ready to wrap up. We want to talk about next week's show.
Hey, next week's a great show because we're going to talk about planning, and topics of money may come up, scheduling, all that's going to come up on next week's show. How to plan your day, your week, your month, your quarter, your year, and so on.
So next week, the business plan.
Tune in for that one. But right now, we want to give a shout out.
Fail to plan.
Fail to plan. Plan to fail.
Plan to fail. That's right. I know it's cheesy and cliche,
but it's true. It's true. See, Joe and I are only using one brain today, so that's why we're saying the same thing.
That's right. We only have one between us today. Who are we going to talk about? Who's our featured business today?
Today's shout out goes to my gut. I love great Italian home cooking.
Baby, bring it, man.
And so my go-to here in town, Claremont, is Gumbas.
Oh yeah.
Frank and Christina over at Gumbas do a fantastic job. Everything is fresh. The portions are gigantic, and the service is impeccable.
Yep.
You can't go wrong there getting a good meal. I'm sure you've eaten there a number of times too.
Per week.
Per week. I try not to go weekly just because it's so much food and it's so good. But it's a great restaurant. It's a scratch kitchen, so everything's made fresh as you arrive there. So you're never getting something that's been pre-frozen, pre-cooked, or anything like that. It's always fresh.
And I will tell you, no matter how busy they are, okay, there is a 90% likelihood that whether you are the first time you've tried it, or you go every week, Frank himself is going to come by and say, hey, is everything okay? We're glad to have you. It's a great family, and there are other family-owned restaurants we'll probably feature down the road, but this probably is a staple of Claremont. It's been here years.
And I eat at a lot of restaurants here in town, and a lot of them are locally owned. And I can tell you, and I've been in this town 20 years, the only place I've ever eaten where the owner has come up to me on numerous occasions and said, "Is everything okay? Were you happy with your meal today? Is there anything that we could do better? Would you like some dessert?" Always frank at Goomba's. I've eaten at a lot of other restaurants, and I'm not bashing them. It's just that when the owner comes and knows who I am because I'm eating in your restaurant regularly and wants to know who I am, that's worth $1 million. I don't care what the price in the menu is. That's where I'm eating.
I got to tell you, I've never had a bad meal at Goomba.
Right.
Okay. And I've been going since I moved here.
Yeah.
And obviously, maybe not weekly, but some months, darn close.
But great food.
But if I were to have any criticism, and it's not even really a criticism, it's just a reality of what you have to deal with a popular place. Sometimes you go in, you're gonna have to wait a few minutes for a table, because it's a really popular place.
You gotta wait,
And if you're waiting for a table, don't get grumpy when your pizza takes a little longer. And I saw somebody. I actually had to say something. I don't usually talk to the other table, but I was in Goomba's once, and somebody was being grumpy. Well, they'd ordered a calzone.
Oh.
Look, you order a calzone.
That's a process.
It's 45 minutes cook time, no matter where you are. They haven't ignored you. They haven't forgotten about you. Now, they could leave your calzone in the kitchen and bring everybody else's food out there, but then you'd complain that...
Or they could nuke it and you have it in 5 minutes.
Exactly, and it would be
patience.
Gross,
Patience.
So please be aware that if you walk in and you have to wait 10 minutes for a table, they have great service, but you can't change physics.
But, go ahead. Goomba's is next to the Epic Movie Theater. Frank and Christina are there all the time.
Yeah.
Go in. They're open Tuesday through Sunday for lunch and dinner. Great food, big portions. You'll love it. Tell them that Ken and Joe sent you, and maybe they'll get you a dessert. I don't know, but hey, you gotta get something for us. But anyway, we'll see you on next week's show. Thanks for joining us this week, and we'll be back next week with a brand new show, and the show is going to be
business planning.
Business planning. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
All right. Bye-bye. And I love you.